Hey there, kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get on to tonight's story, I want to remind you guys about No Brand. No Brand Con is going to be in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Dells, actually, on March 29th through the 31st. I'm going to be there. It'd be wonderful if I could be able to see you guys, because I freaking love the Dells. So it's great to be able to hang out with you guys, tell some stories, do a few panels, run a couple of game shows, and so I hope that I can see you guys there. Also, tonight's story comes from TheJesseClark, which I've done a few stories from JesseClark before, and all of them have been really fun or really terrifying. Kind of a mix of both. If you guys want to find out more from TheJesseClark, as well as many, many other amazing no-sleep authors, check out The Trees Have Eyes, Horror Stories from the Forest, available now on Amazon. Okay, on to tonight's story. This diary was found in France and restored. March 1916. Got fresh recruits to our trench diary. Their officer states that out of the 175 men, only 60 had survived the journey here. One of the young lads was a talker, too. He asked us if we'd seen how the trees are blown up back there, if we'd seen red stains on the rock left by those horses that had blown up too, and if we came here from some other place. When this fresh-faced lad was finished regaling actual veterans of his heroic deeds, he said that he was thirsty and asked where he could get a drink of water. We told him the water carriages kept getting blown up by the Germans. He could crawl on his belly down a ways and take a sip from the crater with the freshest rainwater like the rest of us. And he could recognize it because there were bodies inside. He then asked why no one had bothered to remove the bodies. I responded, they did try. Half the bodies in there exposed themselves trying to get the other half out. And now, they're all wearing shrapnel. That's why we crawl. He then said, and I remember his words because it was quite amusing, "To hell with it then. I'll take a canteen from the first Fritz I run through with my bayonet." Which the response, of course, was, "The hell makes you think they have more water than us?" They went back and forth for a time. I never did feel the need to learn the boy's name because I don't imagine I'll be using it long. Lieutenant Roberts ran through the mud and asked if the lad had been killed yet. Ran back to the rear when he learned he had not. The boy himself was flattered that an officer had taken such a concern for his well-being. Then he laughed and said, "He drew you in the pool. If you want to do him a favor, then get yourself shot before your friends do." We had a good laugh over that one. Later in the day, a Fritz sniper made Roberts a richer man. The Germans made a run at our trench today, diary. Don't know what for. It wasn't a major push, but a little scrabble of them tried it all the same. Maybe they got tired of all this mess and decided to end it. I don't know. Regardless, we cut them to pieces. Some of the lads here cried after it happened. I cried too. First time I did that. Seeing the damn uselessness of it all. God went through the trouble of making a man, giving him a spirit. And he breathed his last at age 16 because a Maxim round cut his belly open. I don't care what uniform you or he is in. When a man's dying, helplessly, he's just another person. There aren't many more terrible things to see in the world. This is ugly work. But it must be done. April 1916. The worst days are when it rains. God, isn't there enough mud already? All there is mud, damn mud, for miles and miles. The falling shells see to it that the earth can't pack itself together, so there's not much but loose soil that's thicker than a swamp. You dig in mud, you lie in it, you sleep in it, you sit in it, and it gets into the pores of your skin intimately, becomes a part of you. Sometimes we can hear the screams of men who got themselves stuck in pits of mud. They're not screaming for help. They're asking to be shot as a mercy. Once you tumble into the mud, there's no way out. No man can help or kill you without exposing himself to that or bullets. So you're drowned in it over the course of days, or weeks, abandoned, slowly going mad. Their screams tend to stick with you. I'll put it like that. That's out there. And here, in this godforsaken goddamn pit, we have our own abominations with which to contend. When it rains, something from which there is no cover from at all, the trench fills up with water to your hips. You almost live in that until it recedes. Wounded men in the rear belts of the trench drown because the water rises past their noses. There's nowhere, no one to move them. All the fighting boys are busy moving the guns to higher ground because a good gun with 100 wounded men. The rest of us weep. We're so filthy. Another thing, when it rains, the bodies you thought were buried come back to you. Sometimes whole, sometimes in bits and pieces. They're a part of the soil now because the front never moves anymore. There are corpses from a year ago, nearly. Corpse from 6 months ago, 2 months ago, corpse from yesterday, corpse from breakfast, rotting, stinking, feasted on by flies and rats. Over every inch of this place being buried in mud. It's the best they can hope for. But when it rains, all the work we've done to pack them back away into the walls of the trenches is undone. For weeks after a rain, there are feet and hands and heads sticking back out of the walls. Some of those hands are limp, others not. They went stiff in a manner of positions, fists. Pleas for help, pointing fingers. And sometimes at night, when only I and the sentries are awake, a dead hand sticking out from the mud seems to wave cheerfully. Fills me with a special type of dread that it's difficult to describe. But at least those men have the luxury of being dead. It's the true reason I curse the rain. June 1916. The lads are saying a big push is brewing near the River Somme to take the pressure off Verdun. The works will crack through the Hun lines, and the bastards will pull away from Verdun. There won't be a damn thing between us and Berlin. Then we'll all get medals and statues made in our image, and we'll go back to England as heroes. So say the generals, anyway. But I don't believe in or care about any of that. I don't know what I care about or what I want anymore. 2 months ago, I would have given everything to just go home. War be damned. Give France to the Huns, or for all I care, I would have said, but there's not much here I can see that's worth defending, but now, I don't know if I would like to go home because I'm afraid my family won't recognize what I am now. I'm afraid I don't have it in me to love any longer at all. Not like it's any concern because nobody cares what I want. I wonder how it is that human beings can treat other human beings like this. You know, there's a morbid callous involved here that perhaps better men than me can understand. For my part, I can't come close. We heard the distant thunder of the big German guns, and then the shells fell down on us in waves. When those hit, the whole earth shakes, sways, coughs up these giant plumes of rock and dirt and smoke. There's no cover to be found here. All men can do is cower in the deepest parts of the trench they can find and pray. And maybe some lads aren't praying hard enough. Even with the sound of those shells, you can hear screams. howling, agonized screams from all the boys who've lost legs and arms. They're not clean severs either. They're jagged and bloody, awful to look at, flaps of skin wet with blood draping over a stump. One shell hit Fisher, gut. A moment later, he was painting the interior of the trench. His own brother didn't have enough time to process what had happened before a piece of shrapnel went through his throat. He coughed up blood for 20 minutes before he died. And just like that, the worlds of Mr. and Mrs. Fisher back in Liverpool just turned upside down. They don't even know it yet. When the shelling let up, we were left to pick up the pieces of our comrades. One poor boy who had been gurgling blood up and trying to reattach his hand to his wrist. I tossed that and began to bandage his stump. We said nothing to each other during all this. But that moment didn't last either. I'm not sure who it was, but someone shouted gas, and we survivors scrambled for our masks as that damned, wretched, green-yellow cloud wafted its way over to us. Even the boy I was helping snapped out of his trance and scrambled for his mask and held it against his face with his good hand. I tried to do the same, but I realized something horrifying when I pulled my own mask from my pack. A great hole had been torn into it by shrapnel. It was useless. I looked up, could see that the cloud was getting closer and closer, and in my panic, I tossed my worthless mask and fought this poor bastard for his. He was in no shape to resist me at all. I tore it from his head, put it up against my own. And I'll never forget that look he gave me. Confusion, not anger, sadness, almost understanding, and then came the cloud. His eyes widened up, and that look turned to one of fear. Yeah, I was scared too. The whole trench was filled with this hideous gas, and all of a half minute, men choked, hacked, gagged, screamed, gripped at their throats. This lad could do nothing to stop the stuff from getting in his lungs, burning it all up. During that whole ordeal, while he died, never once took his eyes off me, and I watched him. Because I owed him that much. I had to see it. His face contorted. He kicked, thrashed, writhed. With both his free hand and his bleeding stump, he clawed at his throat until it bled too, and maybe was that the blood from the stump. Doesn't matter. Fortunately, he didn't last long. Other men did the same. One fellow opened his throat with his bayonet. Another, gagging and blue in the face, crawled around a bit until he found a pistol and shot himself in the mouth. Still others shook, shuddered, and cried out and cursed God. When the gas subsided, all that could be heard were screams. Screams, 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 long and loud and unending. Some men wept. Some more shot themselves. Lieutenant Roberts couldn't speak, he couldn't blink. Couldn't do much of any damn thing except sit there and babble and shake. I checked him up and down for wounds, but he had none. Then I removed his mask and saw an animal staring back at me, no longer a man capable of thought or reason, a happiness. I suppose men can only endure so much before they're ruined for good and no more use to the army. Like old shoes or guns that don't work. As he was dragged off to the rear, I curled up on the ground next to the lad I'd killed and cried for hours. Many others did the same. Still, others just screamed. For hours and hours until nightfall and beyond. Screaming. Screaming. I'm a child again. This place is hell. July 1916, the day of the push. Many thousands of our big guns are throwing shells at the Huns at a rate that is simply astonishing. Supposedly, no German could survive this, but they always say that, and the Germans always survive the shelling just as we do. And if they don't, they replace the dead with fresh meat from the grinder. My stomach is sick thinking about what comes next. No one here is talking. I suppose we're all wondering the same thing. Does it hurt? The artillery must have fallen on concrete, diary, because what we are witnessing here is not so much as a war as murder. Every one of our lads who stepped out to fight in waves was cut to ribbons before they fell. Someone here has miscalculated gravely, but we are committed. So the whistle gets blown again, and the next wave of soldiers, boys as young as 16, some of them go up over the trench line and meet the very same fate. Then goes another wave, and another, and another. Every man here knows he will not survive the march. And he was merely minutes to make his peace with God before he and his brothers are ripped apart. They go over the wall anyway, stone-faced, having accepted death, not like there's much else to think about in this place. My time is coming soon, too. Damn. One of the men has been screaming from the moment he was hit, and he survived 3 more advances of our boys. I can't imagine what kind of wound would drive a man to make those noises. It's inhuman. One lad here must have recognized the voices crying, but there's nothing that we can do because 2 rescue excursions have both ended in disaster, and the officers won't permit a third. That man will have to scream himself to death. I hope he's quick about it. All this for what? What great terror is this war preventing that would be worse than the war itself? I don't know. Maybe nobody knows. Maybe even the old men who sent us to die know only enough to tell other old men back in London and Paris that they at least tried to breach the line, but it didn't go so well. Then they can all shrug and get back to their supper. There's the whistle. If we meet again. Bye. So this is where it will happen, diary. God went to the trouble of making me and giving me a spirit just for me to die in a shell crater with a bullet in my ribs and one in my leg. I suppose I have nothing more to say. You, diary, are covered in mud and condemned. And no one knows or cares that you're here at all. Just like me. I think I've got to go now.
Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I'm just here at the end of the video to let you guys know that I appreciate you. Or podcast, if you guys are listening on the Spotify or iTunes or Google Play podcast or whatever fine podcasts are found. But seriously, thank you guys so much for listening, thank you guys for commenting, for subscribing, and I especially want to give a big thanks to Tyler Ramberg, Jazzy G, Mercer Viruses 02, Sindee Barney, and Andrew Bankert. You guys have kind of made the show what it is because you guys are the sponsors on Patreon. If you guys would like to join them or have your name read out at one of the end of these videos, please check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Every little bit helps. Seriously. So, again, guys, thank you. Sweet dreams.